almost 7 years ago, there was no taxi cars at all. Year by year, you can see more and more cars in Pyongyang and outside of Pyongyang, because we also sometimes have chances to go outside of the capital. And there are different estimates, but at least 2,000 or 3,000 taxi cars are in Pyongyang today. Different companies, different types of cars. You can see more and more big cars, which means that people have more and more money they would like, and they're ready to pay for that. Our last trip was in March of this year, and it was clear, at least for me, that despite of the recent sanctions, and despite of the fact that the prices for gasoline in March were 3 times higher than a few months ago, 3 times higher, taxi cars were still in a great demand. And one of the impressions from the last visit, we went to the restaurant and there was a medical university nearby. There was a line of taxi cars which was waiting either for professor or for students. When I was a student, I was not able to hire a taxi car on the way to where I stayed. So again, my point that during the recent years there was steady improvement on the economy. It's not only about taxi cars, it's about cell phones, how many cell phones local people have. According to some estimates, 80% of Pyongyang citizens have cell phones. It's of course different in the regions, but it also gives you a sense what the trends in economy are. The same true how many restaurants, and it's mostly not for foreigners, let's be clear. It's mostly not for foreigners, because I remember when I first time spoke on this with some of my American friends, and their reaction was that probably it was a show for you, so you will get it and you will bring it back and we'll start proliferation of this knowledge and information. But a regular taxi car driver will never pick up a foreigner. So it's only for locals. Again, if this is a foreigner, he should be specially guided and escorted and etc. So again, it's for locals. And there are other indications what the improvements of the economy are. And as I mentioned, our perception from the last visit, March of this year, it can be different today in early August, but as March of this year, you cannot see in Pyongyang visible impact of sanctions. I mean, restaurants are full, people use cell phones, and let's be clear, the cheapest device, cell phone device which is assembled in North Korea cost about $200. About $200 US. It's not cheap. I mean, for us, well, it's not very expensive, but for North Koreans, we perceive that it's quite expensive. So my point that the country from inside is quite different how it is being portrayed. And this is why I think there are many misperceptions, many miscalculations with regard how North Koreans see the developments around their country. When we discuss the denuclearization of the Korea, of the DPRK as it is in the title of our session, I think of course we should put in the broader context of denuclearization of the peninsula and to the broader context of regional security, or what Francesco was speaking about. We cannot ignore the North Korean threat perception. And this is exactly why they started to develop their nuclear weapon program probably in late 1960s, because they feel threatened. They feel threatened. And it should also guide us what should be the basic principles for next steps if we are serious about progress in the direction of denuclearization. I think that security-related steps should be the basic principles. Because in the past, sometimes there were attempts that there should be steps in the security domain from North Korean side, and we will pay in return, either in kind by crude oil or deliver some goods. And we know that this approach at the end appeared not to be sustainable. Because again, as I mentioned, if we will just pay for what North Korea is ready to do, it will not address the core of the problem of North Korea. They feel threatened. They feel threatened. Next point, and this question was raised in this audience a number of occasions earlier today. So what motivated North Korea to be more open? This year, why Kim Jong-un introduced this idea of a dialogue on January 1st. And it was the question which I came with to North Korea last time in March. And I will share my conclusion in a minute. But I do believe that recent developments are really positive. I agree with Jishe that probably this is the last chance for us to prevent North Korea from being fully capable and have fully operational nuclear arsenal, which includes ICBM. And here we can disagree with Toby Dalton, though again I mentioned that I do agree with him on many other issues, including he used a kind of Iran model or some elements of negotiations with Iran. So again, I do believe that we do have a window of opportunity and we should try to do our best. I do believe that the recent two summits were quite useful. Of course, some of us had high expectations than the outcome is. But I think these are the very positive developments, because I remember what was the situation last December. And again, my personal family experience, as Mansoor mentioned, we visited the Olympics in March with the whole family. I have kids of 6 and 9 years old. Well, and I was eager to come in October last year. I was not so sure in December. So I just imagined that, well, if a military crisis starts, tensions will raise, how I will react. It's 9-hour flight back to Moscow. I have 2 small kids. Well, I know how crowded the Olympic Games are. So in December, well, I was not so sure that it was a good idea. So Kim Jong-un's statement from January 1st was a good gift for us. So again, from that point of view, of course, there are very positive developments, and Dr. Jishe just mentioned what the recent positive developments, US citizens who were present in North Korea returned. There is a nuclear test moratorium, missile test moratorium. Nuclear test site has been exploded, though we knew, of course, ahead of that event that this test site was damaged significantly during the last North Korean nuclear test. Though, and I do see it as a positive development. And it was our finding during the recent travel to North Korea that they are ready to make some steps which I would consider in the direction of denuclearization. At least in our conversation, they were trying to avoid using the word denuclearization. But nuclear test moratorium, missile test moratorium, I think Steve Miller mentioned in his presentation, if a country would like to improve its capability, it must test. It must test, we know it from our experience. Representatives of other nuclear countries know it's from their experience. So from that point of view, I think this is an important development. And I think we should discuss what could be done next. Because as I mentioned, I have a perception that North Korea is ready to make some next steps. And I think this is why the think tank scholars are critically important these days to generate the ideas. Which could be employed by those governments which are involved in negotiations. So, what kind of approach could be used? I don't think that full scope roadmap would be easy to accept by North Korea these days. Because as I mentioned, they are trying to avoid use word of denuclearization, though of course it's in both declarations of as a result of two Korea summit and US-North Korean summit. If you will read North Korean newspapers, they don't mention this word often. But again, I think we can be creative and to try in attempt to determine what the next steps could be. And here I like Toby's reference to Iran negotiations, because I do believe that there are some elements from that negotiations which we can use for a dialogue with North Korea. The status of nuclear program of North Korea and Iran completely different. From my perspective, and I know that some colleagues in this audience could disagree, from my point of view, Iran has never made a decision to build nuclear weapon. It researched in that area, but never been, and there was no decision to build nuclear weapon. North Korea made 6 nuclear tests. But if we are serious about progress, for example, one of the important elements from Iran negotiations which we can use, we should identify, we must even identify the core issues. Because in the case of Iran, it was nuclear issue. In the case of North Korea, probably it will be a broader set of issues. But there are some issues which makes dialogue much more complicated. The issue of human rights, the issue of abducted people, they are very important. But if we will put them to the same group with issues like nuclear weapon and delivery means, it will make things much more complicated. So this is why I think we should identify what the core issues for dialogue are and what are the issues where we would like to see the progress first. Or areas where we would like to see at least a cap from North Korea's side first. How to frame this kind of dialogue to develop next steps. And I like the approach which was used during Iran negotiations a lot, because it's proved to be effective. What countries should participate, again, we can discuss determine at a later stage, but most likely those countries which were part of 6-party talks with North Korea in the past. And I'm not sure that all 6-party countries should discuss all issues which we are going to discuss with North Korea. For example, why Japan, North Korea needs Russia, or China to discuss the issue of abducted. So it should be discussed simultaneously in a separate room with North Koreans by limited number of countries. So there is no need to have all 6 countries. The same true with regard to some other issues where probably we don't need all 6 countries, where this issue could be resolved with just a few countries represented. And with regard to abducted issues, which I know how sensitive for Japanese colleagues are, there, in the return, North Koreans usually raise the issue of sex slavery during World War II. And these are the very sensitive issues. Why Japan, North Korea will discuss, and probably South Korea, because it's also related, will discuss all these issues jointly with China, Russia, and the United States. Some of these issues will be discussed separately, but simultaneously with the core issues. Other important element from Iran negotiations, we should be ready to recognize North Korea's right for peaceful use of nuclear energy. The same true with regard to the outer space exploration. There is no chance for us to avoid this kind of recognition if we are serious about the progress. So from that point of view, this element from Iran negotiations, when the right for Iran for peaceful use of nuclear energy, of course under IAEA safeguards, would be used as part of negotiations with North Korea as well. Another important element which I already mentioned and which Francesca mentioned in her presentation, we should take into consideration the security interests of all countries, including North Korea. We cannot ignore it. We cannot single out North Korean nuclear program from broader security challenges in the region. Because if we will try to do that, most likely we will fail at the end. So my view that based on our communication, so we should try to build next steps on so-called phased approach. So we should identify what next steps or a set of steps could be done then both sides should be ready to make those steps. It's not only about North Korea. And I think one of the challenges we face today, while I believe that North Korea is ready to make some further steps, I'm not sure that Trump administration will understand what kind of steps it will be ready to make in return.
Mr. Anton, could you summarize?
Yeah, sure. And there are a few non-sensitive areas or less sensitive areas where cooperation between with North Korea is possible. For example, nuclear safety. We should check against the UN Security Resolution, but for example, safety of light water research reactor, which was supplied by the Soviet Union in the past. This is not the facility, to my knowledge, which was used for the military program. So, if we will progress further, it could be one of the areas for dialogue. The same too with regard safety of experimental light water reactor, which is under construction by North Korea. The same approach could be used with regard to safeguards, to apply safeguards at the beginning, not to all facilities, but to some facilities. The same two facilities could be chosen. But again, my vision that it will be very difficult to Pyongyang these days to accept full scope roadmap. So most likely they will be ready to identify some list of next steps. It should not be too long. And when we are able to make those steps, new steps could be identified. And the Iran experience, as I mentioned, to summarize my talk, could be applied. In our communication, North Koreans quite often refer to that experience, Iran experience, on a number of occasions, ask us to brief them what is going on, first in the negotiation process and later during the implementation of the deal. Thank you.